Today on the Free Marketeers, we're talking about South Africa's lockdown changes, a SABC tax, and a new smart city planned for South Africa. All of that and more in this week's episode of Free Marketeers News. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Free Marketeers News with me, Chris. On the 1st of October, 2021, it's time for spooks. I hope you're all ready for the upcoming month. Helping me to unpack a very busy week of news and business items is Gideon Joubert from Paratus. I'm sure a lot of you follow him online. If you don't, I will link to his profile below. But for now, Gideon, thanks very much for being here.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for the invite. And it's a bit of a spooky list, now you mentioned October, of stuff, like at least one or two rather horrifying items on there. But I think we're going to get to them in due course.
Mm-hmm. Let's start off with the announcement yesterday by President Ramaphosa that South Africa has moved to adjusted lockdown level 1. For those of you who didn't participate in yesterday's family meeting, the president announced that we would have moved to adjusted level 1. The curfew now begins at midnight and ends at 4 a.m. Curbs on alcohol have been scrapped, except for a prohibition on sales after 11 p.m. The size of indoor gatherings will be increased from 250 to 750, while outdoor gatherings will increase from 500 to 2,000, providing social distancing is maintained. Funerals are permitted to have up to 100 people in attendance, but post-funeral gatherings remain prohibited. Masks will be required in public. The president did say that the health department is working on a vaccination certificate, which would be in line with international best practice and the World Health Organization guidelines. So that's fantastic news. He also expressed optimism that the UK would soon lift its travel ban on South Africans. He said he spoke to Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the phone. Gideon, your high-level thoughts on the lockdown changes. I mean, for me, the thing that stands out is just the gatherings point, and I think it's pretty indicative that with local government elections on 1 November, of course, they're going to increase the size of gatherings.
That, and I don't think that's a cynical point at all. And the next part is how arbitrary it all is. I mean, we're 550 days roughly into this lockdown. In 550 days, they couldn't compile and publish a list of criteria that determines which level we're supposed to be in, apart from the fact that what is allowed per level has changed, like a sliding rule at like the space program in the 1960s. It's so either they are terrible communicators or they are making everything up on the fly, and nothing about this is scientific at all. There is no sort of threshold that if something happens, this means we go into level 4, or if this happens, we go into level 1. The only difference between level 1 and level 5 in reality is one television appearance by the president, where he doesn't take questions, where he doesn't engage with anybody, and where he will just simply pontificate and lay down and announce that we are now moving to full lockdown again. And without wanting to get bogged down in too much deep discussion, we are on a time limit. I think it's just worth pointing out, in my opinion, that no amount of mask wearing or social distancing or hand sanitizer or vaccination status is going to fix this. Because you can't fix a problem where you're sitting with tyrannical government overreach by thinking complying with a set of public safety restrictions or mandates or recommendations is somehow going to address that problem, because those mandates and complying with those recommendations aren't designed to address that issue at all. It's completely beyond the scope of it. So we will continue to remain in this unscientific, economy-destroying, livelihood-destroying, job-destroying lockdown situation until the end of days, unless, of course, we start taking action as civil society with the sole purpose of ending it. That's my takeaway from it.
And don't worry, everyone, we can get ready for the fourth wave coming in November. So we'll have the increased gatherings before the local government elections. That'll happen, and then we'll go to a higher lockdown level after that. So let's look forward to that. Of course, you can come back to this episode and tell me if I'm wrong. I'll be very happy if we don't go to the higher levels of lockdown, but please come and tell me in late November, December, if that's the case. Moving on to our next
I don't think
item.
you're going to be wrong, by the way. I think you're spot on. But anyway,
thank you.
That's
Thanks very much. I think that's a good note on which to end. I'm right. So let's just end it there.
I like that. Cheers, folks. See you next week. No.
Our next item, and I think this one is something that Gideon was very keen to comment on specifically. I mean, all of it we want his insights on, but this one especially on MultiChoice wanting a new tax to fund SABC. So MultiChoice, which of course operates DSTV, that we all watch the rugby on Saturday mornings when we watch the Springboks lose. MultiChoice has told the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies that it's against the suggested changes in the draft SABC bill. It also opposed the SABC's proposal that MultiChoice be required to collect TV license fees on the public broadcaster's behalf. The SABC wants the license fees collected as a household levy to help rectify its 76% quote-unquote evasion rate. I mean, that's just people choosing not to pay their TV license. It should be a choice. And it suggested that the levy be collected in part by MultiChoice. MultiChoice suggested that SARS is best suited to collect TV license fees for the SABC. In other words, it should be treated as a tax. This is in line with a proposal from the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse, or OUTA, which has also called for TV license fees to be converted into a tax levied on South African households. Now, and I don't like this word, somewhere Martin van Staden is very upset that I'm mentioning this word, but the pragmatist in me sees some of the logistics appeal in this, but it's very anti-poor legislation and suggestions to say it should form part of a tax and just be sort of included and administered by SARS. What do you think, Gideon?
Well, it's a complete capitulation from MultiChoice's side in the sense that I think any sane person can just look at the SABC, what it is, not the complete lack of value that it adds to society, how it's been run essentially into the ground, and that like SAA, like the post office, like many of these apartheid-era white elephants that never transitioned into the 21st century, it has no right to exist, and we would all be better off if it just died. And taking with it this archaic system of TV licensing, which really is nothing other than yet another source of funding that can be misappropriated or stolen by corrupt government officials and their connected cronies and the like. It would have been a far more sane approach if OUTA and MultiChoice actually went straight to the core of the issue and say, but why is there even a TV license at all? What value is the SABC adding to people who own televisions that they need to pay this fee or even now pay a tax on televisions? As someone who doesn't have a television in my house and that has not owned a television for, I think, 10 years at this stage, I think if you turn it into a household levy, why am I or other people like me paying essentially a TV license when we don't even consume the product of television? It becomes, I'm not going to say an esoteric discussion, but it becomes a point of principle, as in, why is this done? I think the STV was also the same people who wanted to penalize Netflix. They ran to the regulator because Netflix was stealing their customer base because they are an outdated business model that really is overpriced and not really delivering anything worth watching. 400 channels of nothing and like MasterChef reruns. I mean, the only thing they had going for them is, as you said, you can watch the Springboks and the Proteas lose.
Excuse me, what's wrong with MasterChef? Okay.
Well, you can only watch it so many times. I think if you had to watch the same season 3 times and you're still surprised with the result, then maybe a TV license is something you'd want. I don't know.
Okay, I hear you. Fine, fair enough.
But yeah, I think a terrible idea. In short, the TV licenses should be scrapped altogether. The SABC should be liquidated, and all the people who work there will find gainful employment in that entertainment industry, for the simple sake of, I think that the white elephant that the SABC is, and the barrier to entry that it poses to creativity and creative endeavors by its sheer existence, there would be a positive social externality in the event that the SABC just ceases to exist.
There we go. That particular SOE has been solved. Moving on to another one, the South African Post Office, that bastion of reliability and entrusting them with your precious correspondence that you want to send to family and friends. So the Post Office wants 8 billion rand from government. I suppose it could be worse. It could always be more. But apparently the Post Office is in survival mode, and they've asked the government for 8.16 billion rand to save the company. This was revealed in legal documents filed by the General Manager of Legal Services within the South African Post Office. The Post Office responded to an urgent court application by Solidarity against the Post Office to force it to pay medical aid contributions of more than 600 million rand in arrears to Medipose. Here's a quote from Solidarity. For months, SAPO failed to pay the full member contributions to the fund on behalf of its employees, while the deductions still appeared on the employees' pay slips, end quote. The Post Office talked about the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting in severe liquidity crisis. As a result, some creditors, property rentals, medical aid contributions, pension fund contributions, and SARS obligations have remained unpaid. So, Gideon, let's just give the Post Office 8 billion rand and it'll get back on its feet, right?
Well, the only positive thing about what you've just read to me is the fact that they haven't paid SARS any money. That's great. We all need, in general, more of that. But, the Post Office has been in survival mode. I can't remember a time when it was not somehow on the brink of complete financial collapse. Of course, there are some very nice people working there, at least at my local post office. But then again, you have rapists and murderers who work there, who were at the Claremont post office just down the road from where I circulate. That's about a summary of what the post office is. It's a fiscal rapist and murderer sucking tax money away from good uses, where it could actually do something positive, to fund an obsolete dinosaur where the private sector has proven so much more competent, efficient, transparent. There is no one who is not entirely insane who would even contemplate sending sensitive legal documents from one street to the next by use of the South African Post Office. It's so bad that metros and cities and provinces can't even rely on the bastards to deliver infringement notices pertaining to speeding and things like that. And that's a major revenue spinner for cities. So if they can't rely on the Post Office to do that, and they're trying to find digital ways around that conundrum, then it certainly illustrates that, again, like the SABC, like SAA, does the Post Office have to exist? The people who work there can be gainfully employed by any of the numerous competitors. Again, it's something that comes from an era that we would all be better off with the dead and buried. And I know that this is sounding awful on a Friday afternoon in October, where things are spooky, and all that I've been saying for the past, 13 minutes of this discussion or 10 minutes of this discussion is how all these state entities should die. But we're confronted with this almost every 6 months, and COVID is the wonder excuse. Oh, everything was fine until COVID happened. We're in this, how many billion rand black hole, 8-point-something billion rand bailout? No, that all just happened due to COVID. Everything was super fine before this. All the wheels came off because of a viral pandemic that kills 0.0. I don't even that, not remotely enough people to justify the entire post office collapsing as its sole reason. It's just no.
And now I have bad news for the post office, because there are, I think, more pressing issues on the sort of budget wish list, which some civil society organizations are going to push for more than they would for a bailout for the post office. And one of those items is a universal basic income grant. This is our next item. So according to Business Unity South Africa, in a statement released this past Monday, They said the country should, instead of a basic income grant, consider an unemployment insurance type product. So that's an interesting turn of phrase. According to a new report and new research, the true cost of a universal basic income grant for South Africa would be 958 billion. Maybe we could run a couple of NHIs with that kind of money. But regardless, Business Unity said it should only be put in place if labor market reforms are enacted to boost employment, the fiscal deficit does not widen as a consequence, and payments are to those in need and are not universal. A true universal income grant paid to all South Africans at the upper bound of National Statistics Agency's poverty level adjusted for inflation would cost about 958 billion. This could be brought down considerably if the amount was cut and the number of eligible people reduced. So, Gideon, I admire and respect Business Unity putting in some of those caveats. I think it's much more important to implement labor market reforms that will properly address South Africa's 44% unemployment rate. But if you were the finance minister, would you try and find 950 billion for a universal basic income grant?
There are a great many things that I would probably have a much easier time at finding, like Jacob Zuma's medical report, amongst other things, than that amount of money for this. And I think from a philosophical point of view, something that we never really discuss when it comes to this is, it's this wonderful utopian idea to say, oh, there's lots of poor people, we can give them free money, right? With no real consequence down the line. I mean, inflation is just a figment of our imagination, but let's suspend that. How can we truly deem it as empowering and adding meaning to a person's life to deny them through bad policies, bad politics, mismanagement, opportunities to really self-realize, to find anything out there worth doing, where their labor and their effort is earning them a decent income? Why do we insist on figuring out new ways to spin, enslaving people essentially by making them dependent on government handouts in order to survive, as opposed to, as you say, reforming labor markets? That's a great point. That is the one thing that certainly should happen. A lot of the stuff they said in justification of what they're asking for is actually really valid, but those things stand alone as really good ideas. You actually could just cancel the entire discussion around universal basic income and just implement those ideas, and you will already, in all likelihood, see almost immediate improvement in matters. We are a known business unfriendly destination. We are known to chase foreign direct investment away through the way we treat FDI, through the way we penalize it, the lack of security, the lack of infrastructure, the constant, probably decade-long gray area about the security of property rights. We are not turning ourselves into an attractive destination for foreign money that we need to build the infrastructure to employ people in a way.
Yeah, you can't really have these job summits and these job plans without the necessary capital, and we're not going to get that necessarily from within South Africa. We need that from foreign sources, as you rightly point out. Our next item serves as a bit of obviously a discussion point, but also a bit of a warning for those of you who might not be aware of it. But Numsa, the National Union of Metal Workers, is forging ahead with a national strike after steel industry wage talks reached a deadlock. Numsa are angered by the wage offer of metal employers and is planning an indefinite strike beginning next week, Tuesday. They plan to hit the streets in all 9 provinces on the 5th of October after wage talks deadlocked with steel and engineering industry employers, with the leader of the Kusatu breakaway, Irvin Jim, promising that workers would stay at the lines for as long as it took employers to budge on an 8% salary bump. So Numsa wants an increase of 8% for 1 year and an adjustment of consumer inflation plus 2% for the following 2 years. This works out to a salary increase of just over 6%, as the Reserve Bank expects inflation to average 4.2% and 4.5% in 2022 and 2023, respectively. The Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa, with which metal unions have been negotiating, offered a 3-year agreement of a 4.4% increase for 2021 and inflation plus 0.5% for 2022 and CPI plus 1% for the 3rd year. So Gideon, the South African annual tradition of strikes, I think, is set to continue.
Well, that's the one thing COVID didn't kill, right? And utter insanity. I don't know if that is too weak a description for this, but I mean, if you look at just everything, the fact that we were in the midst of the longest consecutive economic downturn since the end of World War II, prior to lockdown, steepening that downward trajectory quite a bit. We are sitting with record highs and record-breaking unemployment levels, especially among the youth, where it was 70+%. We are seeing capital flight at extraordinarily high levels. We're seeing a lack of investment. We're seeing all sorts of economic collapses, if we can call it that way. And in the midst of this maelstrom of economic devastation and death and misery, we have major unions who want to go on strike because they want an increase that is double inflation. It's horrific. I'm out. I don't have anything of value to add to the discussion. It's just crazy.
Well, on that point, and some of the numbers that are sort of circling around there, and I recommend that those of you who don't yet, go and follow economist Mike Schuessler on Twitter, because a lot of his analysis will help you make sense of just the context and the broader picture of which we're talking. Because talking about the unions and sort of public sector workers, and talking about the difficulties and destruction that South African entrepreneurs, small businesses have suffered over the last year with very little to no government support, despite all the protestations by the president. Mike Schuessler has pointed out that if you want to be a top earner in South Africa, you should work for the government. Because in South Africa, between 38 to 44% of the top 10% of earners work for the government. In an analysis which he posted on Twitter, Schuessler said this figure rises to 41 to 47% of the formal sector when considering the country's state-owned companies. He said, and I quote, "Seeing that the formal sector is only about a quarter of the adult population, that translates into 40% of the top 2.5% of adult earners are in government," end quote. And of course, government has allowed the public sector wage bill to bloat significantly over the last decade. The tax base is shrinking. So Gideon, for the time being, while we still have some sort of government, maybe all of us should try and get work in government based on Mike's numbers.
I would, as someone who used to work for government up until last year, I'd recommend strongly against it. But it's absolutely valid what he said, because I do remember when I was still flying for Mango, we engaged a guy who had his doctorate in industrial psychology, and his specialization was also labor relations, to kind of assist us with easing a salary negotiation deadlock with management. This was a couple of years ago. And he pointed out very plainly, and he said, look, he can assist us a little bit, but we must bear in mind there's very little wiggle room for the fact that a Mango First officer, who's not the best paid government employee by a long shot, is in the top 5% of all income earners in the country. And that kind of hits home with you when you realize, what Mike's tweet and his analysis and the stuff that he put out there, I think it was yesterday or the day before, really hits home that if you're in government and you're at any sort of middle or above income position, you are being very, very, very well paid with tax money, or in all likelihood, money that has been borrowed, and that taxes are merely sort of gathered for in order to pay the interest to, because we are sitting with a massive fiscal deficit. I don't recall the exact number, and that's been almost growing year on year, and I don't think there's any sort of attempt to bring that under control. fortunately for us, the one reason I think we haven't really seen that in the foreign exchange market is because everyone's been printing money as if it's been going out of fashion the past 18 months. So with that overall M1 increases worldwide, we haven't really been curb stomped by a sort of rand dollar exchange rate, but that may possibly change. But that's also not really all that this is about. Again, you are in the private sector. You work incredibly hard for your money. You take a huge amount of risks. You're trying to get investors on board. You've got bank loans you're paying back. You are struggling under the weight of over-regulation, of bad labor relations, of a lack of security, a lack of certainty, of the destruction of the markets, especially if you're in the tourism industry where lockdown just killed you. And you are being out-earned by the very people who are going out of their way not to help you. How's that for a slap in the face as being a taxpayer?
Yeah, all that talk of social solidarity and we're a family and all that kind of stuff. When you look behind the smoke screens, it often all goes out the window. Moving on to our next item, this is still related to the public sector, and also to the local upcoming local government elections. The president of Kusatu has warned workers that they stand to lose the most if the ANC is booted out of power. Kusatu President Zingiswa Losi said that workers will be the biggest losers if the ANC loses power in the upcoming election. For this reason, she said the federation should wage a, quote, relentless campaign, end quote, to mobilize support for the ANC. No opposition party had shown it had workers' interests at heart, according to Alosi. Instead, they would do away with existing progressive laws, which now favor the working class. Now, on that point, we have a national minimum wage in South Africa. We have affirmative action, BE policies. We have relatively high taxes compared to other peer countries of our ilk. We, of course, have quite restrictive labor regulation in general, and that results in a 44% unemployment rate and a 75% youth unemployment rate. So I would say to the Kusatu president, I don't know if these laws might well be progressive in the Leninist Marxist sense, but I wouldn't argue that they're good for workers necessarily.
Well, this is the thing. When he made that statement and he said, if the ANC loses power, the workers are going to be the biggest losers. And I took one look at the unemployment rate and the trend that it's been, for the past couple of years, as well as everything else that affects workers' interests. And I just wondered, by what metric is it going to get worse? I mean, you would really, really, really have to outdo the ANC to destroy more sort of employment opportunities, employment progression, workers' rights. And by workers' rights, I mean real rights, not the silly laws and protections that are brought into place, which actually serve to erode their rights under the banner of advancing them, which is a fake win. It's actually a net loss. But I mean, let's call it for what it is. This isn't someone being. It's not someone being stupid. Kusatu is captured. They're part of the tripartite alliance. They will, at all costs, do their part to try and keep the ANC in power because they're part of the machine. They're part of the cabal. They are the man with a capital M. When you say the man, they are the man. They're not really invested. Actually, not even really. They are entirely not invested in workers' rights. They're invested in their own rights. The workers can starve. They can lose their jobs. Kusatu doesn't care. They have never cared. That's not what this is about. Maybe once upon a time, a long, long time ago, they cared. But this is about preserving the ANC. And I think the ANC is a bit like a cat in a hot tin roof right now. Everything's going against it. It stands to lose a lot in these upcoming municipal elections. They've pulled every rabbit out of the hat possible, including sort of pushing the green button on the captured elements of the IEC to ensure that their candidate registration goes through in a rather landmark sort of set of circumstances there. They're pulling out all the stops to try and stop the bleed. And this is probably just another element to that overall strategy, is to try and stop hemorrhaging votes and not lose all the municipalities at the same time.
It's interesting how the vanguards of the revolution, the socialist and communist revolutions, once they get into power, how they always use that power to sort of protect themselves from actual market forces and competition. And I think this is playing out in front of our very eyes right now. Moving on to our final item, and I think this is one that would probably be your favorite, not just Gideon's, but the listeners and viewers as well, is the news that South Africa is planning a new smart city in a very unexpected location. So apparently the ANC have been working on plans for a new South African smart city between, get this, Port St. John's and Margate on the Wild Coast. This was according to the Sunday Times from last week. Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dlamini Zuma, presented the plan at the ANC's National Executive Committee, Lekgotla, earlier this month. In her presentation, she described the proposed city as, quote, coastal, smart, vibrant, integrated, prosperous, sustainable, and resilient, end quote. According to the ANC, the new Eastern Seaboard development will reduce unemployment, promote tourism, and reverse migration and apartheid spatial planning. The coastal area between Port St. John's and Port Edward, close to Margate, currently has no significant towns or road infrastructure. Gideon, are you excited?
I'm so super excited. I wonder if there are other reasons why there's no infrastructure in those areas. Like I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's just on the tip of my tongue. But I think there might be a reason. But here's a question for you, and that the minister also didn't answer, because I read through that whole list of things that she mentioned. But what on earth is a smart city? Can she define it for me? Like, what does it mean? And sort of what other sorts of cities are there? Are they dumb cities? Are they cities with learning disabilities? Are they genius cities? Is this like a Trumpism, like it's the smartest city in the world? I don't know what that means. And it's like, great, we're going to plow money we don't have via obviously connected individuals and family members and cadres, because we all need to eat, right? And we're going to build something that has no reason to be where it is. And we're just going to develop infrastructure, and people are going to go live there and be productive. And it's almost as if, well, it's not almost as if, I can guarantee you this, I will eat one of my hats. I'll eat two of my hats if any of the people behind this understand how cities develop, and what the nucleus of a city or a metro is, and how it expands and how it grows, and what the organics of city planning is, or any of these things. It's very Chinese, isn't it? We're going to go build a theme park artificial city in the middle of nowhere, probably destroy a lot of precious, irreplaceable natural sort of beauty and biospheres and all these sorts of things, and just build something there that no one's going to live in. And how we're going to sell this concrete jungle of failure is we're just going to label it smart city and put on some neon signs, which will not shine because Eskom, so you won't be able to turn the neon signs on. I have to give them credit, though. It is one of the most ambitious, stupid ideas I've heard in a long time, and there have been a great many of those. And what I especially like about it is how vague everything is about it. I mean, they're just giving buzzwords, and they're just throwing the sound bites out there, and you can see it, you can hear it, that they have absolutely no clue. So without me being facetious, I'm like, we are led. Chris, I mean, what are your thoughts? What do you think about this insanity? I mean, this has been an insane podcast. I feel like I need to check into therapy right now after this, just to cope with everything we've discussed. But
I thought this was your therapy, to be fair.
Cheapers.
So, I mean, one has to.
It's too early in the day.
Wishing doesn't make it so. I mean, I think you're exactly right on the buzzwords thing. This is sweeping the world now. Fourth industrial revolution, sustainability, blah blah blah. Those concepts and those values, they can be discussed and analyzed, and societies can agree that they want to pursue them. But it's a bit different when they're just like this ticking a list, sort of box ticking exercise that governments think they all need to implement and do now. And I think, I mean, we can't even keep the lights on, as you rightly highlight, in our current cities, whether they be smart or dumb.
You can't
regardless.
keep the water on in Joburg for many parts.
But I do think actually maybe, yeah, it can't actually be a smart city, because to me that implies some sort of 5G Internet of Things connectivity. But the available spectrum will be rolled back on the 1st of November. So we aren't going to even have 5G for any particular smart city infrastructure that gets built. I mean, it all just falls apart when you actually unpick some of the strands. It very much points to that Chinese model, and we know the current government admires what the Chinese
Yeah.
government has done. And to the extent that they've implemented pro-market reforms, China has experienced massive growth and massive success, and they should be applauded for doing the right things. But even then, they've tried to build these massive skyscrapers in cities, and they stand empty right now. I mean, that's going to come to bear on the Chinese economy at some point, for all the talk of how well they're doing.
Well, that's the thing. You can't artificially force these things. I mean, urban development, urbanization, and I do agree. Look, we are sitting with a massive problem of urbanization in South Africa. We're having huge amounts of people migrating from rural areas to pursue economic opportunities that, for the most part, don't exist in major metros. And there's been a lot of literature written as to why psychologically those are actually rational behaviors based upon, you gauging your odds and your chances of doing better, as opposed to actually looking at these problems and going, okay, the answer to this is to implement reforms that will encourage economic growth and development in rural areas, which will mean people can stay there and actually do better lifestyle-wise and economically than they would moving to cities to chase the rat race that cannot provide for them and then end up living in slums. And this is not a problem unique to South Africa. I mean, we see this mega urbanization trends across Brazil, large parts of South America, major parts of Asia and Southeast Asia, even parts of Eastern Europe. So it is a well-documented issue. I just like how this is how badly they missed the propaganda bus in this. They're not even trying to pitch this as a solution to that problem. It's literally something that just popped up in the news. Okay, it's popped up a few times. They've been talking smart city, but as you say, they're parroting it because everyone else on the global stage is talking smart cities. South Africa is the only smart city that when the lights are on will be powered by coal, and that'll be about, if you're lucky, a third of the time, and the rest of it will be candlelight. And it's just, I don't know. Out of all the places where you could put focus and priority, as in looking after existing infrastructure that's busy decaying, crumbling, and just washing away, we're now building these. It's very King Louis XVI bankrupting France, or King Henry VIII, rather, bankrupting Britain, with grand ideas that come to naught. And all you do is you just debase the currency until the people are crushed under the heel of poverty. Which is not really how I'd like to end this discussion, because it is Friday and it is the spooky month of Halloween, and it's been a very spooky chat. So I don't know, Chris, do you have anything uplifting to take us home with?
All that I can say is it falls again on all of us to get the right ideas and policies out there. I mean, that's always my perennial hope. Maybe you'll tell me, maybe people will tell me it's unfounded, as it were, but I think South Africans generally, they want to do the right things. I mean, we saw it in July during some of the violence and looting, how communities came together, worked together to protect themselves and their families. We just need to get the right people into government. Alternatively, and my philosophical ideal wish is we need to shrink government to the point where it doesn't matter who's in power and who's in charge, that they don't have the power to implement any policies that affect us negatively regardless.
Or third option, and it's a bit Michael Malice, just make them irrelevant. Build your institutions outside of government. Let them erode so badly that it doesn't matter which laws they make. They have no ability or capacity to enforce that. So you can just ignore, set a set of social norms that your community agrees with, that is aligned with the concepts of individual liberty and free markets and all the good stuff that matter, because that's where you're going to get the most success out of it by a long shot. Make an Austrian your head economist, and then what you do is, through your activities, you make government irrelevant. And I'm entirely agreeing with you in the sense that I've maintained for a while now that the biggest threat to our liberty is not tyrannical governments or tyrants in government, but it is the apathy of citizens. And the more we outsource things that we should be taking responsibility for to incompetent appointed officials, the worse it's going to get. The more we take that power back and we start taking ownership of our homes, our families, our streets, our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities, our districts, our provinces, our country, the more we start being actively involved in our own governance, and we demand to be actively involved, and we become actively involved, the more we will see changes happen. And this has been proven on small and medium scales by civic organizations, from AfriForum to many others, from townships to cities. So it can be done. It's proven. It's up to us to make that a reality.
I'm glad you've given yourself some therapy now, and me as well. I think we'll let you go now so that you can recover from this, and maybe we'll have you on again in 6 or 12 months' time. But Gideon, thanks very much for being with me today to unpack the news from the week.
It was an awesome discussion, and I would love to do it again. If people want me on, please harass Chris, like in the comments on the emails. If you don't want me on, just also harass him. But then at least I'll know, I'm not popular, and I can go and feel bad.
You're presuming I'm going to tell you about those emails. Those are just going to spam. So.
Well, this is true. Like, touche, sir. But seriously, thank you. It was a great discussion, and yeah, let's see what happens. I'm cautiously optimistic in spite of everything, because I think the worse the government's ideas get, the more panicky they are, and the more panicky they are, the happier I become, because there's a reason for the panic.
There we go. That's a nice note on which to end and on which to sleep at night, thinking about government panicking in the union buildings. To the viewers and listeners, thank you once again for joining us. We greatly appreciate your support. If you haven't yet, please like the video before you leave. And also, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we greatly appreciate your support. As I mentioned, I will link to Gideon's Twitter profile in the description below, so go and follow him for all of his regular insights and analysis of what's going on in South Africa. Until next time, have a great weekend. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.